Hello, reading friend, and thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend a few minutes with Laura by Vera Caspary. This book was originally published back in 1943 in book form. It was published in 1942 in serial form, from what I can tell. It was adapted into a famous film noir in 1944 that was directed by Otto Preminger, and Gene Tierney starred as Laura. We had Dana Andrews, I think, played Mark McPherson, the detective, and Clifton Webb played her friend Waldo Leidecker. So this chat is mainly going to focus on the book, not the film, but I will touch on a few differences, I think, later on in the chat. But I decided to read this. I'm a big fan of film noir, and I like these noir thrillers, the fiction, from the era itself. I've read several from Raymond Chandler. Earlier this year, I read Farewell, My Lovely, and I've read some by Dashiel Hammet previously, and I chatted those here on my channel. Also, Paul M. Cain from this era. I just find these these noirish type mystery thrillers to be so much fun to read from this era. And there's lots of reasons for that. I love the dialogue and the slang and just the atmosphere. But anyway, so this particular book, Laura, I was really interested to read this because number one, I'm really a fan of the film, and I'm usually curious, or often curious to see if I like the film and the film is based on a book. And I haven't read the book, I want to delve into the book and see what the book's like as opposed to the film. So in this case, they were very similar, but there were some significant differences, mainly around the character of Laura herself. So as I mentioned, I will talk about that a little more later. But this book is divided into 4 different parts, and each part is narrated by someone else. The book opens with her friend Waldo Leidecker writing a memorial for her when he's interrupted by the detective Mark McPherson, who has come to ask him some questions because he has been assigned to investigate Laura's death. As the book opens, we learn Laura has been found shot at the door of her apartment, so it's obvious that she opened her door and whoever was there shot her in the face with a shotgun, and so she is dead. There is a quote early in the book by Waldo that says, I'm just going to read it here. It says, "To solve the puzzle of her death, you must first resolve the mystery of Laura's life. This is no simple task. She had no secret fortune, no hidden rubies, but I warn you, McPherson, the activities of crooks and racketeers will seem simple in comparison with the motives of a modern woman." So I thought that quote was really, really interesting because of what we eventually find out about Laura, that she was a sort of a self-made woman from this era where she had lots of challenges in a sort of man's world. She came into New York from Colorado and built her career from nothing just by sheer perseverance and intelligence. She created a career for herself and a lot of wealth for herself in the advertising business. So, she's in sort of, we get the impression, like from other sort of noir from this era, that there should be a femme fatale, a woman that's sort of manipulating men to get what she wants. This is not, to me, not what Laura ultimately is, as we get to know her through the different characters. So we get to know her through her friend Waldo, like I mentioned. So Mark McPherson, there's a portrait of her in the apartment. So her face has been shot, where she's unrecognizable. But there's a portrait of her in her apartment that really draws the Mark McPherson into it, and he becomes sort of obsessed with her and finding out her story, finding out what led up to this event. What was she doing? What was her whereabouts? Who were her associations? What were her activities? Who would want to ring her doorbell and then shoot her in the face. This is the big mystery that we're dealing with here. So I'm not going to give too much away here. This book has several major plot twists, and I don't want to detract from a first-time reader's experience. So I won't go into any more details really around that might be in danger of spoilers. So, but the other characters that sort of appear that let us know about Laura's life early on in the book are her aunt, Susan Treadwell, who I guess was a fairly successful or had some success on Broadway. I think also married into some wealth and is now a widow. And she is sort of this aging woman who was once very pretty and used to getting a lot of attention, especially from men. And, she doesn't as much now. And, as she's gotten older. And so she sort of has that sort of vibe. Laura also had a fiance whose name is Shelby Carpenter. And Shelby is from an aristocratic Southern family that doesn't seem to have a lot of money, but he has sort of genteel ways, he thinks. And so, he thinks he's a gentleman, or at least that's what he tries to convince people of. He's not very successful, though, and Waldo Lydecker hated really all of Laura's boyfriends ever since he had known her, and calls Shelby Apollo Belvedere. So he just calls him that name just as sort of an insult. But anyway, Shelby seems to rely on Laura, and he doesn't want that known because it damages his masculinity. So this is kind of like a main sort of theme of the book, I think, is this masculine-feminine sort of aspect to it. Vera Caspary, writing as a woman in this era, very successful novelist of the time and wrote some screenplays and things like that from what I read up on her. But, she writes this kind of character and this kind of noirish kind of book a little bit differently than Raymond Chandler or Dashiel Hammet, especially when it comes to the portrayal of the women and Laura's motivations, and then the motivations of the men. And the men seem to place themselves around Laura in, like Waldo, for example, seems to want everyone to, plain out says that he's the one that made her career. He basically made her who she was. And, we the reader come to find out, really Laura made herself who she was. And then Shelby, is this, her fiance is this man who's very handsome, very charming, turns all the women's eyes, turns their heads. But, there's not really a lot there. Actually, he's kind of like a man baby. Her aunt calls him, sooner or later, her aunt had, we find out, had cautioned Laura, if you marry him, sooner or later, you're going to get tired of your man baby, taking care of your man child or your man baby. So I just thought that sort of aspect of reading this book was really interesting. So some differences in the film and in the book. One, Waldo in the book is very overweight, and in the film he's very just reed thin. He's very thin, but the dialogue of Waldo, it really comes through in the film. If you've seen the movie, it's very sparkling, kind of sharp dialogue that he has. He's very quick with a put down on people, very humorous, and that language is also in the book, which was really a lot of fun actually to read. The boyfriend's played a little differently, as is Laura. The character of Laura herself is a little bit different in the film as opposed to what we discover of her in the book. Mainly around this idea of, she's not a femme fatale. She's not really manipulating the men around her to get what she wants. She gets what she wants by hard work and intelligence, by her own efforts. And that was really a refreshing thing to read. So class, crime, and gender. There's also a class aspect here. a bit with Bessie, the housekeeper. I don't think I mentioned her, but Bessie is Laura's housekeeper. She's another person who speaks during the novel and lets us know about her, version of Laura. And Bessie has a different take, really. And then there's some other characters that appear that I won't really talk about. That's women that are trying to succeed in New York and not quite being as successful, and therefore doing other things. I'll just say that. And then just the class, like it's really a divide, because this takes place in Manhattan in this heat wave in the late summer, when all the wealthy set have left the city, and so the rest of the people are, obviously just have to stay there and swelter it out. And so, that's kind of a difference in class that we see. Also, Laura's apartment, I think it was on Fifth Avenue, but anyway, it's in a, richer area, and it kind of becomes, a kind of a tourist attraction for really the more working class people to come and see where this social person was murdered. So there's a difference there that I thought was kind of interesting in the book as well. There's another quote in here in the book that I'll just, if I can find it fairly quickly before I run out of time, that Waldo declines to go to Laura's funeral, and he's telling the detective, Laura was far too considerate to demand that anyone venture out at such a barbaric hour and to exhibit emotions which, if earnest, are far too personal for scrutiny. So he's saying here he's not going to go to her funeral because Laura wouldn't want it, because Laura had social standards that she wouldn't want people going out and making an emotional scene. This is to her funeral. So I thought that was kind of interesting. If if you exhibit emotions, and if they're true, if they're earnest, then they're too personal for public view. So that's why he's justifying why he's not going to go to her funeral. Okay, I think I will stop the chat there. I did enjoy this very much. This was the third of the noir-ish book. Oh, I didn't really talk too much about why this is noir-ish as opposed to noir. Mainly it's around the detective and around Laura. So I've already kind of explained Laura, but the detective is not quite hard-boiled. He is rational. He's a bit cynical as the novel opens, but as the novel progresses, we see a different side of him. So it's definitely not the same thing, not sort of the same character as we see in like a Raymond Chandler or a Dashiel Hammet novel. So that's a difference. It is noir. It does have a noir feel to it, although it's not quite as hard-boiled noir as those other writers that I mentioned. Okay, my next chat is going to be Shakespeare in a Divided America, What His Plays Tell Us About Our Past and Future by James Shapiro. And I have already finished this, so I will have a chat on this coming up fairly soon. So until next time, take care. Bye.